Hello, everyone. Hey, audience. Hello, speakers. So nice to have you here. We are here today to talk about the connection between your complaints and your booking success, which is a great way to finish the week. Today's Thursday, tomorrow's Friday, but we're all like low energy levels. We're going to start soon. But while we give folks a few minutes to join us, I'm going to do a quick intro and I want to ask my audience to go into the chat and let us know where you're calling from. We love hearing from you, audience. My name is Eduardo. I am a community events manager at Modern Sales Pros and your host for today. My job here today is very easy. I just need to ensure that everyone is getting the most out of this event. And for those of you who don't know, this event today is brought to you by the team at MSP, the world's largest and highest quality community for those in sales management, sales leadership, sales and revenue operations, and sales enablement, aka our Modern Sales Pros. And our mission is to create an environment for you sales leaders to answer the toughest revenue questions out there and to help you see around corners you might not know about. And we do that through live sessions like this one you're about to experience. We have a robust online forum and we have quarterly summits. And finally, we are getting back to in-person events, which is very, very exciting. If you're not already a part of MSP, you'll be invited to join right after this event. And as I mentioned, we host summits, and we have one coming up in July. So this July 18 to 19, we are going to be hosting the Camp Modern Sales Pros, which is an event, two-day event with more than 15 webinars, more than 3,000 sales leaders, sales nerds in attendance. We have more than 35 high caliber speakers. You can hear from leaders at Outreach, Gainsight, Stage 2 Capital, and much more. So don't miss out. Sign up today. Let me put a link in the chat right now so you can sign up. All right, you have the link in there. Oh, somebody from Minneapolis is in there, Terry. So yeah, somebody from your part of the country.
Great.
So finally, some housekeeping notes. It's great to have you here, audience. You will be receiving a recording of this event and key takeaways after the panel is over. And also the chat and the Q&A is wide open. So please use it. Our panelists love answering questions, so use them, ask them a lot of questions. And MSP, the best thing about MSP is that we don't work alone. We have partners, and our partner today is Everstage. I have Aditya in here with me. Aditya, I'm going to pass the mic to you. You can introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about Everstage, and then you can kick things off. Is that all right?
Thanks, Eduardo.
All
hey,
right.
everyone.
So
yeah.
You can take it over. I'll see you later.
Yeah, thanks, Eduardo. Hey, everyone. I'm Aditya, and I head marketing here at Everstage. And before this, I used to be part of a now NASDAQ-listed company called Freshworks for close to 5 years, where I was handling revenue operations, sales compensation, and it was a natural transition into Everstage. Everstage is one of the top-rated commission softwares out there. So we are rated #1 for enterprises on G2. And we've been in the market for the past 3 to 4 years, and we have so much happy customers in this sales compensation space. And that's a quick intro about Everstage. If you want to learn more about Everstage, you can visit everstage.com. Awesome. I'll let the speakers take over from here and introduce themselves. We're joined by Bhushan and Terry. On to you, folks.
Great. I will just jump in quickly. So thanks everybody for joining. Terry Long. I'm the VP of Enablement at MindTickle, going on day 8. So very excited to be here and also over at MindTickle. For those that don't know, MindTickle is an integrated revenue enablement platform. We leverage science to design rich programming that's based on helping to develop seller knowledge, understand sales behaviors, and then adopt the necessary change to drive outcomes.
Awesome. Hey folks, I'm Bhushan. I manage the solutions and success function here at Everstage, and we've been at this for about 2.5 years. Prior to that, I was a colleague of Aditya back at Freshworks. I used to manage the revenue operations function, and we basically were doing compensation and related activities for about 2,000 pays there. So we used a lot of that experience to build how sales performance and other compensation performance elements should work for the larger enterprise scale businesses. Awesome.
Awesome. So let's get started, folks. Yeah. Cool. So to summarize today's session right there. So over the next 30 minutes, we're going to be having an open panel discussion. So the first part, I'll quickly run through a few minutes on how sales compensation trend has happened over the last 2 decades and what we are currently witnessing out there in the market from 2020s, right? So I think we have evaluated close to 100 plus companies and close to 1,000 plus comp plans over the last 2 years. So for us to know what the common trends in the sales compensation space has been, and then quickly talking about what those four trends are, and then moving on to having a panel about how you as a compensation leader or a sales leader or an operations leader can effectively embrace those trends to see how you can adopt them in your role. So yeah, so to start off with, we looked at the early 2000s and looked at the overarching trends during that time, right? This is the time of 2000 to 2010 where basically new bookings were the main focus in compensation, where people were being given targets to go after new customer logos, and there were high commission rates set for everything, and stock option as incentives was thrown around as well. So this was the overall sales compensation trend that most of the companies adopted during this era, where it was all about how many new logos can we grow, how many new business growth can we see year on year. And when we look at the decade after 2010 to 2020s, so that's where we saw the growth at all cost trend. So here is where we saw the trend of accelerators, lucrative bonuses, short-term incentive programs, tiered commissions. So during this trend, the sales were made more specialist and accountable for growth, but it was also sensible, right? Like about bookings, invoices. So there was some tussle between the first half of the trend around whether should we do bookings or invoices, but then people eventually figured out that clawbacks is a way of after first 6 months or something, clawbacks came into the picture. So if customers leave before that, they get clawed back. So this was a trend around the 2010s to 2020s. And then we started into the latest trend that we have been seeing for the last 3 years, which is driving around accountability and collaboration. So the COVID kickstarted this phenomenon of customers having to be retained, and it was churn across the board during the 2020. And because of that, companies realized the value of fostering long-term relationships. I think that which started during 2020 has really taken over the last 2 years. So right now, every company, every sales team has also been, in some sense, being made accountable that they are not just closing deals, but are also closing good deals. This is one of the major trends that we have seen in the last couple of years. And the second trend is also fostering collaboration because everyone went remote during the COVID times. And that means you have to balance the team-based angle of sales versus the individual incentives that sales are traditionally known for. And this is another trend where we have seen team-based incentives start creeping into the compensation plan as well slowly. The third trend is around gamified milestone-based incentives. So this trend has been something that of the recent over the last 6 months to 1 year that we have started noticing. But companies have really started adopting very innovative techniques around compensation to ensure sales are motivated. And I think this also started with the great resignation that started happening in 2022. And the final trend is the rise of consumption-based pricing and what that means for sales compensation. So with that said, let's get started on the first trend. Awesome. So the first trend is around the growing focus on customer success in compensation. So I think, Terry, do you want to explain this more about what you have seen around this trend over the last few years and your experience?
Yes, absolutely. So initially, I think CSM comp plans were fairly straightforward and centered around retaining customers. But there was a recognition that there was an important opportunity to shift the focus and really get anchored on leading indicators. So initially, that main focus in compensation was on the deployment of services to clients. And once you successfully have that, you can actually turn towards engaging and encouraging adoption within the account plans. As time goes on and the efforts in promoting adoption are proving fruitful, beginning to concentrate on executive engagement as a leading indicator for compensation is very purposeful and really is key. And then the last phase really entails designing and aligning the CSM team's objectives with the client goals and verified outcomes. So there's been remarkable achievements in terms of strong gross retention, successful deployment, high adoption rates, active executive engagement, and proven outcomes. And then that really allows you to earn the privilege to motivate the team towards an expansion by really generating customer success qualified leads. I think from my perspective as an enablement leader, it doesn't come without many challenges in the enablement lens, because we are now recognizing that we have to shift competencies that CS teams had not previously had. So it requires you, one, to have clearly defined competencies by role. You need to go back and really use data to understand and identify your ideal rep profile, and then leverage those insights to create this integrated enablement program that can really support up-leveling those CS teams with the knowledge, skills, process, and tools so they can start effectively executing against the comp plans.
Those are great points.
I think definitely.
Yeah. Bhushan, go ahead, Bhushan.
So I think the one major trend, at least that we saw coming across specifically of 2020 was new sales were hard to come by during that time, right? Obviously, given the environment and challenges, I think companies had to really look inwards to see what are the growth levers that are available. And as you mentioned, Terry, this was one of those underutilized areas or a lever that was not used during that time. But it basically, as I said, necessity is the mother of invention, right? I think it forced people to look inwards to see how we can make better utilization of team, to not just basically look at driving or retaining revenue, but how do we use this function as also a revenue generation function, right? In terms of making sure that they were able to not just retain customers, help them actually succeed and grow, so that we are also able to go ahead and reap benefits of that growth. And I think that change has pushed things even at an operational level to change how the customer function actually works today. So like we at Everstage today introduce our customer success managers to the customers right on the first call itself, even during implementation. It's not something that we bring in later in the game, because we want them to be the point of contact, the person they are going to be working with for their life cycle, making sure that they're able to go succeed. And this person has a full picture of the goals that the customers are trying to achieve, that there is nothing lost in translation from projects being handed over. And basically all that gets baked into their KPIs, right? That we want them to basically see, measure, and succeed on.
Okay. But I'd like to ask one question to the panel here, right? Like basically, how do you then differentiate who influence something like an upsell, right? When your customer success is getting involved from day one of the customer onboarding. So sales team also wants to get commissions for the upsell that they make. So how do you go about that?
I think definitely a scenario that would happen. And again, some of this is not new. This kind of riff has always been there, specifically when it comes to lead gen, right? There's always been different sources in marketing competing who is actually responsible for getting the organization the revenue. But I think this is something that is solvable, again, focusing on the other element that we were looking at, right? Collaboration. Some of these metrics are hit in tandem. It's very hard to go ahead and attribute that it was an action that made the sale happen, right? It was completely by team A or team B. I think there is a law of averages that apply here, that yes, it would be in a certain fashion that only a happy customer would actually think of expanding with you. So if the customer success team had not done a great job in making sure that customers happy, they are getting all the value that they were supposed to get out of the services you were to deliver, obviously there is no chance of having an upsell kind of a scenario happen. To say that they did not influence it would be completely wrong, right? Even if they may not be actually talking about the commercials or basically getting you the lead gen, I think the account health itself is a metric that needs to be measured to basically bring in the impact of customer success. If you had a really healthy account, it makes it more easier to upsell or cross-sell into that account rather than having like an account that's they're not happy with you or your engagement with them is poor. The likelihood of you making a sale on that account, any additional revenue from that account is extremely low.
You know, I'd like to add one more thing. At least in a couple organizations I've been at, depending on how you're onboarding the customers, there is the recognition that within those first 30 days, if you don't have a success proposal, if you don't have a mutual action plan between the sellers and the buyers that clearly states what we've purchased the platform for, what we're anticipating the outcomes will be, what we believe your platform can solve for us, the pain. If those elements are missing, that's really probably to no surprise, but that really can create some unfortunate, I would say, interactions for the customer success team. And in my experience, we've actually had to go implement success planning tools as a vehicle for which to capture that, because deals have come out of onboarding and there's been a lack of clarity around what did we even purchase this for? I don't understand what it is you're going to solve for me, which then impacts our ability to upsell, cross-sell, and expand.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Completely agree with you there, Terry. And just one more thing about customer success and compensation, right? So one of the common areas of sales and customer success usually fight about is around also the expansion, right? Who should get attribution for expansion in general? Who should carry the targets for expansion? Who's basically going to be the one owning those numbers? What are your experiences been in terms of that in general to both of you?
I would say I've been at companies that have done it multiple ways. We've had an AE expansion team who's responsible. It really goes back to, do you have a hunter-farmer model? How are you deploying your field? I've also been at organizations where the CS team is 100% responsible for expansion. Once that deal is closed, you are responsible for everything. Again, I don't know that I could say that there's a right or a wrong way to do that. It's really going to depend on the product, your TAM, what your market strategy is. But I think regardless, ensuring that whatever levers you have in your comp plan are really driving the behaviors that are going to get the results you're looking for. Because the mistakes that I have seen is when we're actually putting things into a comp plan that are driving tasks, or that are saying you need to have, let's call it 3 working sessions in order to get your spiff within the comp plan. What that does not allow for is us to distinguish between what a good working session is and what a bad working session. So we're incentivizing a behavior to do an action versus incentivizing a behavior that drives an outcome.
I think, completely agree, Terry, right? I think what I've seen in different companies is a bit of a spectrum, as you mentioned, right? Based on how engaged or the different teams are. I've seen variations where based on, let's say, the compensation and the risk profiles of the companies, and more importantly, like as you mentioned, the business segment that the organizations are operating in, they may take a certain percentage, right? Like that's always a very strong tool. You can have compensation, a part of the compensation on this, and not all of it. And you can vary that weightage based on the type of profile that exists. So even in an organization, if you're serving different classes of customers, let's say mid-market to enterprise, you may have customer success teams aligned to them differently with different metrics. And they could carry different weightages on their compensation based on, hey, for an enterprise, it may be much higher weighted on driving success and expansion, where it might be a little different for, let's say, a SMB or a mid-market, where the heavier focus may be on retention and less on revenue. But that's always a very strong tool to go ahead and move that lever of what goes into the actual compensation metrics finally. You can go ahead and alter that where mix, because again, as I said, one size doesn't fit everything. It changes based on the type of customers you're serving and the product and services you're in.
100%.
Awesome. So let's move on to next time, folks, unless you both have anything else to add to this. Great. Yeah. Oh. Good. So this is trend number 2 that we have been noticing. So this trend, I think, came from the largely adopted approach during COVID times around remote models and sales reps being across the globe. and collaborating. And I think one of the reasons this term came about is people started realizing there is no internal knowledge transfer happening between sales reps. That made it difficult for the star sellers to teach growing sellers on how to, best close deals in a particular industry or in a particular target segment, right? So because of this, what kind of trends that we've seen is one is reps carrying a portion of the target as team targets on top of their individual targets. And I think this is usually set up to ensure there is some skin in the game for the overall team's attainment for the reps. And the second thing that we've seen is a common team bonus pool. And this team bonus pool, upon the team hits a few goals, they're able to get a share of this bonus pool as well. And the final thing is collaborative performance metrics on around hey, how many joint opportunities were they able to generate through either going to events or outbounding to same account together, or contribution to team-based project and so on. So these are common trends that we have at least seen over this. And my first question is to Bhushan, right? Like, how do you see this evolving, right? Like, sales has always been an individual-focused game, and now there are team-based metrics that are coming into the sales compensation, which is a core part of sales. So how do you see this trend, and why do you think this trend came into the picture?
I think it also came down to the type of customers you were serving, right? Say, so if I see more enterprise companies, right? Enterprise companies still move the paths of looking at star sellers, right? They are still very individual focused because it goes back to the ticket size itself, right? For those companies, those single deals actually are a very large share of the overall revenue that they're going to make. There is significant enough that the individual contribution matters significantly to the overall revenue. Right? Now, in those scenarios, setting up a collaborative kind of a pool will basically is a very a razor's edge kind of a scenario where it has to be very finely aligned so that it doesn't demotivate your star sellers from going beyond if they're not getting their compensation, right? Because again, a single deal is going to make or break the whole scenario because the ticket sizes are too large. But as we have seen more services come out, which are trying to cater to the mid-market and SMB kind of businesses, which is more driven by velocity, right? The goal here is to basically close as many deals as possible, because your services, the type of products you're providing are not typically, the ticket sizes are not going to be massively off. You have a very good sense of the range that the typical deal values fall in, and they're fairly consistent. That drives basically a lot of cross-learning that needs to happen. You're now really focusing on conversion rates. The goal here is that to convert as much as possible. And for those pieces, it would make sense to have these kind of pools so that the teams can learn to play off of each other, apply those similar strategies. Right. And I think, as I said, it's just a function of how businesses are moving. And I think that's going online and remote has made it so that a lot more companies today now needed those tools, which was not just a very enterprise thing. Small companies today are also looking at remote kind of operations. And this has opened the door for these kind of compensation plans to really come through.
Mm-hmm.
Great insights there. I have an interesting question for Terry, but before that, we have a question from our audience. So either of you can take it up, right? Like, do you see team bonus as cross-functional or intra-function within functions as well?
Is that one for me? I'm sorry. Oh, go ahead, Sean.
Yeah.
Oh, I thought that was for Terry. My bad. No, so team bonuses, again, they are implemented in a certain fashion. For example, I would share it across individuals and not across teams, which makes it very difficult to basically assess performance, right? So like we were talking earlier, if you get a really great upsell from an account, the bonus may be spread over, let's say, folks who collaborated on that account. So it could be across the CSM, the account manager, let's say the technical support team. They may be getting a share of getting that upsell done. But doing it across functions at an entire group level is extremely difficult because it will always come out a generic average number, which again is not aligned to the behavior that you want to drive. The goal of all of these is to drive a certain behavior. Doing it at a very large scale on an average metric, it basically just falls into the land of it has no impact on what changes people will do in their operations, right? How will they change their operating procedures to basically align themselves to these incentives? That you won't be able to drive any specific impact with this, in my opinion, specifically. But when you do this within a function, the idea, as I said, is it really fosters a scenario of people learning well from each other. Because let's say if I can go help coach this person to get his conversion rate up a little, I also qualify for the team bonus pool, right? And the team basically comes together to make sure some of those things happen, offer advice, offer any kind of content that they can do for helping them actually scale up, because that benefits their function. And since the metrics and the competencies are aligned, it will drive that behavior together if it's not across functions. One here, your thoughts on this as well, Terry?
I'm going to agree with everything that you just said. I do think it comes with some difficulty. What we experienced in a previous organization was frustration around low performers. Now, I don't think that that's unique to any company that decides to implement team-based incentives, but there's a reality from the perception of the sellers, whether that's depending on how you organize it. But if it is, as the question, I believe that the question was, is it intra-function? Yes, it should be within the function. And I think you need to be very clear on what are the outcomes, what are those behaviors, because incentivizing as a team individually to hit a number with a team bonus on top of that can work really well with the right triggers included. It doesn't work well when it's holistically a team bonus and you've limited the individual performance drivers. That's where we saw a negative impact, and it went back to, listen, I'm carrying so-and-so and so-and-so because my performance far exceeds theirs, but they still get the bonus. I think some of that's just general common sense, and you learn over time.
Awesome. And I have a follow-up question for you, Terry. So with the team-based structure, what the fundamental philosophy seems to be is reps should help each other enable themselves to do better, right? Like then as an enablement leader, right? Like how does that look in your way?
Yeah, the model, whether you call it mentoring, whether you call it a buddy, there's that lens. But I'm going to go back to what I said, I think, within the first trend, which is it's really difficult to help enable your team to be more successful, especially in team-based modeling, if you have not gone through the exercise of understanding what competencies make up your selling teams. And it's going to vary across each one of the roles. Then going through the exercise of identifying through that data, what is my ideal rep profile for a BDR, SDR, AE, Strat, CS, SC. They all have different individual profiles, and getting that data that can then help inform you on if I'm going to up-level my team and we're going to work together. This goes back to, if anybody's ever done, I'm sure we all have, the psychology test to figure out what our personality is. It's kind of the same concept of getting your team in a room and helping each other understand who's performing well in these competencies that are going to help drive the business outcomes, and what are the things we can do as a team collectively to help up level over here. And it's going to be part and parcel to who's in the group. It's going to look, that makeup's going to look different. And then it's enablement's job to help drive that and build programming and put it into place to help accelerate those. So I think that, to me, that is absolutely fundamental. Otherwise, you're just shooting in the dark and guessing at what we need to enable you on.
Absolutely. That makes so much sense, Terry. Thanks for sharing that. And before we move on to the next topic, we have another question which says, how to account for external factors like market conditions when selecting metrics for a commission plan? Do you want to take that, Bhushan?
I think every organization who's operated during COVID would probably understand or would have dealt with this scenario one way or the other. I think everyone deployed some different kind of strategies around it. We, as a business, like at the previous organization, didn't want to change the goals that we were aiming for, because that would really put us in a bad place with respect to how we are faring, right? That's performance measurement is a very different thing compared to compensation. So we separated those two elements very clearly, right? And the other element was about how do we make sure that the people are taken care of, because there is a real challenge out there in terms of executing on this goal. So what we did is we didn't change any of the goals. We didn't change any of the structures, but we modified the rates that people would get paid at. So as a simple, let's say, whatever you were to get paid at about, let's say, 50%, we would actually pay that similar compensation paid out, let's say at 30 or 40%, right? So that you have a little benefit coming into you. But from a measurement perspective of where we as an organization are landing up, we were still measuring against the true goals, because we still have to live up to those numbers and understand whether we actually deliver. We can't move the goalpost for ourselves and measure things differently. But we still want to make sure that the folks are taken care of. And so we applied that strategy. We always did a very quick review of these market conditions periodically, almost at a weekly basis, to see how things are changing, right? Whether we need to go ahead and extend that leverage more to the reps, or if the situations are improving enough, there's a point we can actually start tapering it down, because we also have to be financially prudent for the organization in general. So it came to a point where we have to effectively track what's happening, and again, as best as you can, because a lot of these are macro factors, very difficult to judge. But the idea is you should be very responsive to it. You should not stick to a decision and live with it for a very long time. You should react quickly with respect to how things are happening, for the positive or the negative, to make sure that people are aware that the organization has their best interests, and the overall success of the organization is also not threatened.
Got it. And I have a follow-up question, right? Like, basically, how often do you think companies should reevaluate their compensation plans?
I think there should be a midpoint check-in, right? Like, is what I would say. If you should look at a 6 months periodic. Is the goals, like what Terry mentioned, was a very good point. It's a mutual action plan between customers and organizations. The same applies for the organization and the reps, right? You should see, is this plan achieving everything that I wanted it to achieve? Mm-hmm. More often than not, that what we've seen with organization is they include a ton of metrics, right, within their compensation plan that they want reps to perform on. Now, what happens typically happening in those scenarios is very diluted focus, and then basically just people gave up on some of those metrics and say, we'll focus on 3 that I can actually go to, right? And because if you don't do an evaluation 6 months down the line, you'll see that, hey, I'm driving, or at least trying to drive this behavior, but I don't see any pickup of it, which means now there is a challenge. Either there's a real world challenge of executing on it, or the way I've designed my compensation plan has an issue. Maybe the behavior I'm trying to drive, I've not made it lucrative enough, right? Is it something that I want to really emphasize and push people for? Or on the other hand, is this something that is beyond their control, right? So it becomes a challenge. You have to basically evaluate every 6 months, given your velocity, more quarterly if possible, but 6 months gives you enough set of data to basically take an idea of how things are actually panning out, right? And take a call on that.
Okay. What have you seen, Terry, on this? Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Well, actually, what I've seen, I just wanted to extend on that comment, because I think it's so critical. Yes, there needs to be a midpoint, but one thing that we have seen, again, if I reflect on the different organizations I've been at, is there is a percentage of people who don't understand how they're actually getting paid, and more importantly, what activities they need to be doing to get to that, whatever their payout is. And that could be around spiffs, that could be around accelerators. And so I think we as leaders need to be aware that even if you do have a 6 month midpoint and you recognize, hey, this isn't driving the right outcomes, take even 2, 3, 4 steps back and think about, one, have we really enabled our sellers to understand how to run their own business? Can they back into their own numbers? That exercise, I think, is overlooked quite a bit. And so I think that's it's really an important assessment to make of your team.
Great point, Terry. Awesome. Let's move on to the next trend. So this is my favorite trend. So this is something that we've seen over the last year cropping up. It's gamification and incentives, setting up for milestones, metrics like first to hit the target, first to close 10 deals, first to close 3 multi-year contracts. And if it's an enterprise, first to close 1 multi-year contract. And milestones like highest close of the quarter, most number of deals closed in a quarter, best conversion rate. So in general, I think the trend has been a fresh breed compared to what SPIF programs used to be. SPIFs used to be very hard to establish return on investment on, very hard to make a case for. And most of the times it were people accidentally getting those SPIF programs rather than aiming for it. So these kinds of trends instead are micro gamification kind of incentives, and they have started to come up a lot over the last year. So Terry, you seem pretty excited about this topic. So what have you heard about this or noticed this?
So we have used this, and I do believe that this can be successful. It's especially impactful as a short-term strategy, not necessarily as a long-term strategy. So if there's a behavior, for instance, maybe it's forecasting, and we're really looking to help increase our sales leaders' ability to forecast effectively, putting some sort of an incentive or gamification into the plan so that we can help drive that's a great use. That though, again, is a short-term strategy. I think any of these trends that we've listed here, whether it's the highest close rate, most deals closed, this fits very well generationally with some of the younger sellers, because there's a need and a want for instant gratification. And when they're looking at comp plans, everything seems so far out of reach to them. So this is a great way of really getting them excited, getting them engaged, making something feel incredibly tangible. But I'll go back to saying they're great milestones. They can align with onboarding. They can align with initiatives that you're driving to change behavior within the organization, but they really are a short-term strategy.
Yeah, it feels like video games, right? Like when you want to hit the target, close 10 leads, close to contract, something like that.
Correct.
Yeah. Bhushan, what do you think about this, Bhushan?
No, I think fully aligned with what Terry mentioned, right? Like, so these are like pit stops, right? Like to get to that 100 laps, you have to do that 10 lap, 20 lap, 30 laps, right? So it sort of gives people a good checkpoint. Like, hey, if you're hitting this, you're probably on track, right? To get to where you need to. So like if I think about in terms of marketing, right, to generate pipeline, you probably have to go generate enough leads, right, before. So that's the leading action that you want to incentivize to basically get to the higher action. And these scenarios, basically these deals and milestones actually help drive that behavior, that you're focusing on the leading indicators to get you to that final outcome that you want to get to, right? And again, it's important to basically emphasize them well early on in the game, I would say, so that it picks up the momentum, right? Like what I've seen, unfortunately, for a lot of organizations, is this is typically done in the tail end of the scenarios as a last-ditch boost or effort. But the point is, at that time, probably the ship has sailed, and it's very difficult for folks to go ahead and make changes.
Absolutely. I think that's the accidental swift part, right? Like you're putting up a plan, but like, who's going to hit it has already hit it. So at that point, like, no one new is going to be able to hit those targets. Awesome. Anything else around this topic, Bhushan, Terry, that you would like to add? Cool.
No.
The final trend, and one of the most complicated trend of the last decade, right? Like I think since 2016, 17, a lot of buzz around this trend, consumption-based pricing. So are sales even sales anymore? Like, because consumption-based pricing requires sales to ensure adoption of the product and usage that was promised by the customer to actually happen. And this really throws the entire sales compensation into the mix, right? Because contract value is non-existent in consumption-based pricing, because the customer is just committing to something. They may or may not use it. And how do we go about sales compensation in a consumption-based pricing world? And I think this is a common question most of the people around compensation keep asking, like, how do I do compensation around this? Does either of you want to pitch in?
So what I will say, and this is a complicated topic, even for me, I still don't know how to solve for this myself. But what I will say is, in the models that I've seen recently, sales, yes, being treated as customer success. There's incentives, meaning the AEs actually have within their comp plan, they do have expansion metrics. And while that's an expansion metric and not necessarily a consumption metric, there's still a correlation to what did we sell this for? What are we solving for? And what are we doing within that mutual action plan to drive the benefit? And then again, working with the onboarding team to drive the adoption of the tool. I think there's elements of that. I do believe that this is very complicated. I think I see, again, I'm using a very small window of experience on this one. I have seen value in the consumption modeling within our CS onboarding teams versus our customer support teams. And what I mean by that is within that 30-day window, being compensated on health scores, being compensated on having decision makers within that 30-day period of time engaged and helping to drive engagement. That's where I've seen it have some success and traction.
Great viewpoints there. Bhushan, what have you noticed around this?
I mean, I've seen a lot of tactical action taken by folks, specifically like in the last year or so around this. A lot of like fast growth companies were still focused on heavily on the booking side of things, right? To get revenue in as quickly as possible. I think they've transitioned it to a scenario where they're doing part bookings and let's say part collections, right? Or a milestone basically where a customer successfully gone live or the project has been finally implemented. So they are basically going ahead and making sure that for these kind of scenarios right now, specifically when budgets are a little tight for organizations with respect to how they're operating, they want to make sure that the compensation that is due for the reps is paid out, but they also want to basically first ensure that the value that we have supposed to deliver to the customer is actually happening, right? Before that, making upfront payouts, these are typically have been deferred over different periods to make it a little more. I mean, it's not very popular with reps, definitely, but this is something that's happened, which is a good middle ground between like what the companies want to do versus also making sure that reps are incentivized upfront.
Got it. And do you worry that reps getting incentivized upfront for revenue not collected is gonna, like, at least in this case, it's going to be a long time before people pay, right? So how's it going to affect the overall sales?
So again, it heavily depends on the type of segment you are operating in, right? Like again, if you are looking at velocity deals, and so you really can get an idea. You have enough data points to basically make an assessment of what is the likely cost of that to you, right? And based on that, you can take a call of what kind of let's say if this does happen, are we willing to live with that kind of a cost with us? On the other hand, like when you're selling with large ticket deals or like high ACVs, in those scenarios, I don't think you really have a choice. You really have to transition over to a model like this, given the uncertainty in the markets right now.
Got it. We have another question here. So one is, lots of questions. What are the amounts you would recommend to get the seller's attention for those temporary incentives? So I think, Bhushan, this is around the spiffs from the previous ones that you're talking about.
Yeah, I think we've seen, dependent on, again, it goes back to the goals you're setting basically. But what I'd say is typically should be about, let's say, 10 to 20% at least of the overall goal for the period that you're setting. If it's less than that, it doesn't really, we've not seen at least enough traction pick up on it. But again, to fully analyze, you have to basically slice and dice the data from multiple dimensions, as Terry mentioned, right? Were they enabled enough to do it? Was it actually possible as a schema to do it? But we've seen that when it's actually about 10 to 20%, it actually drives the right kind of behavior from folks.
Got it. And this is 10 to 20% of their overall incentive value. That's what you're talking.
Yeah, I mean, for the associated period, right? Whatever is the ROT for, like if you're looking at a quarterly repay, then maybe for the quarterly scenario, what would their ROT be?
Got it. Yeah, we have another question here, which is, and I think we can move into Q&A session of this. What are the key metrics companies use for consumption-based compensation? Bhushan, you want to take this one, or Terry, you want to take this one?
Bhushan, I'll defer to you on this one.
Awesome. No, so I think as I mentioned, right, what I've seen with organizations is if they're following somewhat of a pay-as-you-go kind of a model, right? In those scenarios, they basically are buying certain tiers in terms of payment, say pricing up to this and so. And if you've gone ahead and gotten that an upfront contract, companies are releasing a part of the payment upfront, where I've seen, again, depending on how complicated your implementations are, it could be that, say, you get 60%, 70% upfront and 30% is paid out when the implementation happens. But let's say if implementations are very complicated and that's the stage where you see like customers fall off or projects not going through, I've seen it to a deferment of 20% upfront and 80% paid later based on when those milestones are hit. Yeah.
Got it. And I think basically when you mean key metrics, David, I think we're talking again still about ACV, right? Like what is the committed ACV value and what's the final consumed ACV value? I think other than that, sales really can't control anything else directly, at least for us we have seen. So hopefully that answered your question. And the second is, I think, yeah, there's a specific question like, what are the amounts you would recommend to get seller attention for those? I guess this is again based on Swift's portion.
Yeah, so again, it goes back to, as I said, what's the typical OTs that you're working with, right? You have to make sure for the period, it's about 10 to 20% of the OT, depending on what kind of reps you're operating with. So, right, it would actually drive the associated behavior you need. There has to be enough in there for them to actually strive to go ahead and make it.
Awesome. Any other questions, folks? Like, I think both of the panel members are available for Q&A for the next 10 minutes. So if you have any questions, please feel free to put it in the chat. Okay, I guess we have one question. No, that's just Eduardo motivating. So when we are here, hey, Eduardo, hope you're back.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you, Eduardo.
Audience, let's send the speakers more questions about compensation and how to get your bookings related to compensations, how your compensation plans can influence.
Eduardo, I'm not able to hear you properly.
I think your headset might either not be picking up audio or it might be just weak on battery.
Hi, can you hear me now?
Now we
Yes.
can, yes.
All right, good. So audience, we have our speakers for 10 more minutes. Do you have any other questions about how to correlate your compensation plans to your bookings? It's a very good topic and I've been enjoying a lot what you guys saying. Let's wait to see if the audience has anything for us.
Yeah, but while you're waiting for the question, right? I think I have an open question for both Terry and Bhushan. Like, what do you think is going to happen in the next few years, right? Like, what one trend you think should be part of the compensation of the next few years? Like, if any suggestion there?
It's an excellent question. I don't know that I could confidently say this is going to be a trend in the next couple of years. I guess where my head goes is outside of trend, because customer success is so critical right now. I don't know what the trend is, but I would say that things around customer success, incentivizing around that area of the organization is going to become increasingly more important, increasingly more visible. Because of the macroeconomics we're in today, that is the driver. If we, one, are not retaining our accounts, and two, expanding into those accounts and really, getting additional market share or products, into those accounts, that's where we're going to struggle. So I do think that there's going to be a much stronger focus on the customer success programming when it relates to comp.
Got it. Great viewpoint, Terry. I think customer success is the focus of the hour, right? Like everyone wants to play defense today, save their customers, try to expand them even, because new business has really started becoming hard over the last few quarters.
Mm-hmm.
And I think before we jump into your question, there is another question. Hopefully, one of you can take it, which is, how do you balance accelerators while also considering the costs, especially when commissions are not capped?
I think this is where your historical payouts and having that information helps, right? You typically see what kind of trends are possible, and you have to basically keep an eye out on some of the exceptional deals that are happening, right? So those are things you need to keep an eye on. But typically, capping commissions is not a recommended strategy. in general, because it sets a bar, right? It encourages sandbagging by reps, where they'll say, hey, if I don't have enough to basically if not, after this it's capped, right? I'm not going to make money for the closing at this period. I'm going to most likely defer it, right? Or not, maybe try to push it and get the revenue in as quickly as possible. But it goes back to the same snubs of your cost of acquisition. I think if you have a great idea of what the cost of acquisition typically for you is, after a certain point, if you see that those accelerators are the per dollar revenue cost that you're paying for those customer revenue dollar, if it's getting too expensive, that's where you have to basically draw the line, right? Of what that limits it. But instead of actually putting up a cap, what I would suggest is you track your pipeline more effectively. If you know there are opportunities out there that are looking basically that may cause this scenario to happen, there's proactive ways to basically tackle those out as exceptionals. And it's better to basically put that in the comp plan as well, that opportunities after a certain size may receive a different treatment. Again, the idea is not to cap, but you may defer the payments for those separately, that we'll pay them as the invoices come in, because it's too large an opportunity. We want to make sure we can successfully go ahead and serve this customer before we actually go ahead and have the compensation go.
Awesome. I think it's just protecting against the black swan event that's going to affect the compensation.
Yeah, so I think investors is just be aware that something is coming and not be caught on board. And it goes back to tracking your pipeline, making sure you have a great idea of at least these top 10 deals in your pipeline, right? Which are going to really move the needle.
Yeah. And we have another question here from Jason. Talks about any advice for introducing a commission or bonus structure to a salary team that doesn't have one existing?
So
I think we did that. No, go ahead, Eric. Go ahead.
Yeah.
What I would say is everything needs to be tied back to seller performance or the performance of the team. And so as long as that is the tie back, selling is a team sport. Everybody's involved in some aspect of it. So if you can tie it back to the overall performance of the organization, I see that as a win-win. It typically can be anywhere from 10 to 30% of a bonus structure based on overall performance, however you want to run your metrics. But to me, that sends the right message that you are here to help, as be part of the team, help drive the outcome that we're looking for, whether that's on the new business, on the acquisition, whether that's on the retention, renewal.
Yeah. So I think we actually went through the scenario where we had to bring on board a team onto performance pay when they were not on performance pay. And I mean, just doing it flat out when they don't have it is actually a fairly difficult conversation. Typically, you would want to basically time that out with, let's say, your annual appraisal processes or so, right? Where when you give them the additional incentives, you basically make a part of that as part of a variable, right? So you're not taking something away from their current base, but you're taking it away from the additional that you are going to give them, right? And if you do that at the right time, it basically helps you set the context also that there's a upside to this as well, right? Where you're able to, if the organization succeeds, you're going to be able to make a lot more than you would have, right? And it protects both sides. But again, that's what the strategy we deployed to make sure that we use that time of the year to basically make this happen, because that was the easiest transition to do.
Got it. Hope that answered your question, Jason. I think we have time for one more question. Any other questions, folks? Yeah.
I have a question actually. Okay. Hi. Okay.
You're going in and out, Eduardo.
Hello. Is it good better?
It's a little better, yes.
All right. I have a question. We've been seeing people focusing in long-term contracts and getting their rep and their sales team focused on contracts. Have you seen any changes in the timing of when the compensation happens? If it's when the contract is signed or when some renewal happens? Have you seen any correlation in there in the timing of the compensation and with these long-term contracts when it happens?
Sorry, Edward, you're cutting in out for me. I couldn't get the question for you.
I'm going to add the question to the chat.
Yeah, yeah. In the meanwhile, I think we have a question from Fran. Which do you find motivates better performance, bonus versus commission? How about percentage of base pay versus bonus or commissions? Better to motivate by having performance be 60 to 70 percentage of pay, or more like 20 to 30%? I think there are two questions, right? Like one is bonus versus commission. I think that's the first question. And second is like, which is better? Like, do we do 60 to 70 percentage of pay as bonus or commissions, or 20 to 30%?
So I think
Terry?
it goes back to, I think, yeah, my only point was if you could think of the roles there, right? So typically, as I've seen, sales typically will have a much higher percentage that they carry versus roles which, again, may have limited control of what they're doing, right? Based on the activities they're performing. So, for example, let's say a BDR team, right, or SDR team trying to generate pipeline in a certain, the control that they have in terms of, let's say, if you're rewarding them, let's say on opportunities that they bring in and which they close. I've seen companies pay bonuses on those. Their control on that factor is limited because there's a lot of moving parts ahead in the value chain from there onwards. So that team may carry a lower percentage with respect to the bonus and so. But depending on what value that amount of control and the amount of leverage that particular role has to the buying or selling process, I think that really determines it. So sales typically we've seen it as high as 50 to 60%, right? And in enterprises companies, it could be just purely commissions and no base, right? But I've seen the variations of it depending on the ticket size and the roles that the people are typically located in.
Got it. Any thoughts on that, Terry?
I actually agree with everything. It's really role dependent. Maybe the only other thing I would expand on is if you're looking to help incentivize non-selling roles outside of the BDR, AE, CS teams, enablement, we do have a bonus, and the bonus is performance-based related to the selling team and the organizational goals. And I do see, again, there's a big benefit in doing that because it really helps everybody understand that they have skin in the game, that this is a team event. This is not just one person. And so we all need to work together. I see that as being very successful.
Yeah, absolutely. Great points about that, Terry. I think we have a final question from Eduardo. I'll take this one for a change. So with companies focusing on long-term contracts, should we pay them when the contract is signed or when the contract is paid? Yeah, I think this has been a debate for quite a while, Eduardo. It's bookings versus invoice. And I think the most common rule of thumb is companies focused on growth usually pay on bookings when the contract is signed, because they want their sellers to just focus on closing new business and keep bringing those up. Whereas companies that are a little bit large enterprise, who have been there for a longer time, also relatively not growing at that pace, for them, getting their invoice collected is more important than just getting it booked, right? So usually it's where also the sales process is not over after the contract is signed. Probably the implementation is going to be the most important part of the process to ensure the customer is actually going to pay, because a lot of customers do walk out after unhappy implementation. So I think in those kind of scenarios, we've seen it paid, but I think at least in most of the high growth firms, 70 to 80%, I would say, it's based on when the contract is signed. So sales reps just make the contract signs and just move on to new deals. Cool. I think, Eduardo, do you want to wrap the session up? And
Awesome,
thanks, everyone. I think we had a great session, and thanks to both speakers, Terry for joining us and Bhushan for joining us. I think I learned a lot, and hopefully everyone who joined here also learned a lot. So thanks a lot for that. And yeah, I'll leave the stage to Eduardo.
Yes, thank you. Terry, I know you need to leave, so you feel free to drop whenever you need. I know you have a meeting right now. But audience, thank you for joining us. We love having you here. You are the best part of MSP. Again, you're going to receive a follow-up email with the key takeaways from today's session and the recording for this session. And once more, thank you to our amazing sponsor, Everstage. If you want to hear more from Everstage, click the button, request a demo of our sponsor at the top of this page, so they will be in touch with you later today. Speakers, thank you so much for joining us. we can hang out backstage. And while we hang out backstage, the MSP team will make sure that the recording and the key takeaways are available for our audience later today. Audience, thank you so much. I'll see you next time. Thank you, speakers.
Thank you.
Thank you, Eduardo.
Thanks, folks.
Yeah.